I am Ruth Barber. I am a partner at Fund Consulting, and I am going to give you a little fireside chat on what is need and demand with reference to your FA application. So obviously we're talking about need and demand in an economic sense. So this is one of the most common things we see in applications, and sort of a really strong use of need and demand is a way that you can really increase the viability of your business strategy and really convince the reader that you really know what's going on in your market and that your business strategy is viable. So other reasons why it's important is that the strongest applications are going to link need or economic distress in your market to your products. So for example, if you establish that incomes in your target market are lower than other places, then the products that you're proposing should directly address low income and be designed to work for people with lower incomes. And then another thing is that demand is one of the most important things in your application, because it will show your reader that there is a strong pipeline and that there will be demand for your product. And that's one of the key things you want to convince your reader of if you want to score well on the application. Okay, so what is the difference? So in this case, we're using need and economic distress to be the same thing in an economic sense. So need is something your target market and its residents require to improve economic conditions and or quality of life in your target market. So in an FA application, when they ask you for need or economic distress, it's usually going to be based on secondary data. So some of the types of data that you might include are low per capita income, high unemployment, high underemployment, low wages, high poverty, unbanked, the percent of unbanked and underbanked, low housing values, high percentages of the population seeking public assistance. And this year in particular, you might also reference any sort of economic conditions that have been made worse by the COVID pandemic, and whatever data sources you have for that. And one of the keys with using this data is to compare it to other data so that it's in context, right? So if you tell the reader, well, our unemployment rate is 3%, but you don't compare that to the state or to other areas or to the nation, the reader doesn't really have a context about what that means. So you want to make sure that not only you're providing data that shows that there's economic distress, but also that you compare it so that they can see that it's greater than it is in other areas. Okay, so demand is the willingness of the people in your target market to the willingness and ability and need to and desire to pay for something. So it could be that we all have things that we need that could be that could improve our economic situations, but we would never buy it. So the key is really to show that there are people willing and able to line up and use your product. So again, the way you're going to show this, one way is going to be secondary data. And you're going to try to show really the size of your market. How many people are in your market? Is it growing? Are there industry articles that show trends in your markets? Are there data points that show high levels of financial activity in your market? Those are sort of the data points that are going to show that can help show that there's demand. So. And then you want to include, this is really important, your organizational data. So you'd want to have sort of recent activity levels showing what lending you've done, and you want to have information on your pipeline. If you have a pipeline, if you have people who have been approved but you can't fund them yet, this is all very important to show that there is sort of unmet demand for your product and there are people waiting to use it. Another thing that is useful with demand is sort of having expert observations on the market. So you can also include things about staff members who might, or lending officers who might be out in the community or outreach, and what they're seeing. It might be your staff that are providing development services, and you might say, they've noticed that, in the past year, this is something new that people are starting to ask for, or really just any observations. Those are actually can be strong demand indicators that you should feel free to include if you have them. And then finally, one of the really good things to include is your own research. If at any point in the past couple of years you have conducted any interviews with stakeholders in the market, or done any surveys after development services or with any of your borrowers, or if you've had a market study commissioned, or if you collected data for your strategic plan, sort of any of those things are also very strong demand indicators, because they show evidence of data that's been collected and people who've been spoken to, essentially, that can bolster your demand. So a couple of tips. One is that you want to cite all the data sources that you use in the questions on need and demand. Whether it's whatever it is, for both your local data and for your comparative data, you want to make sure that you're citing all your sources. And then the data from any sort of study that you've done is very strong. So just, for example, including that you've had a market study done, or a needs assessment, or something that looks at data that was a study, is really strong to be used in your application, and will definitely lead to a higher score for your section. So make sure, if there's anything you have, any sort of organizational document, any sort of research, that you put that in there. Okay, so that was my quick overview of need and demand. I know it's confusing, but doing it right can really positively affect those sections of your application and actually your business strategy altogether. So good luck.